And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again, and it's going to be another one of those videos which is just a random thought. Something that I've been wanting to say for a while, something I've been thinking about on and off for a while, and something that kind of relates to comics as much as everything else. And so I just wanted to discuss it with you, the viewers. With no further ado, today I want to talk about the idea of whether or not it's better to consume comics physically or consume comics digitally. But I don't want to do it in the way that a lot of people do it, in that I don't want to focus just on comics, for example, or in fact just on any particular media. I want to give a shout out to the YouTube channel Gaming Off the Grid. They have no idea who I am and they have nothing to do with me. But if you're a big fan of retro video gaming, definitely check them out. They're a great channel run by a great couple of guys. It's really funny videos, really interesting content. They did a video a while ago, a month or so ago, about physical or digital and how the high street was dying in terms of video games. And it was a really interesting video, quite thought provoking for me, and it kind of led to this video. But I don't want to talk just about video games. This isn't really a video gaming channel. And I don't want to talk just about comics because I think that narrows the conversation unhelpfully. What I want to talk about is the idea of whether or not it's better to own something physically or to use a digital mechanism to consume content. And in that sense, I'm actually not going to come down on either side because personally, I use both channels. I use physical for some things and I use digital for some things. I don't think it's sensible to say demarcatively with some certainty you should definitely always go digital, definitely always go physical, because the conversations are wide and varied and the importance you'll attach to each of them is subjective. So, with no further ado, I just want to talk you through it. And what I would hope is anyone listening to this particular video will consider each of the points that I'm going to make and then consider where they come down on what side of the fence for each of them and what their personal comfort and tolerance is. And hopefully it will allow you, the viewers, to move forward with either purchasing more physical content or purchasing more digital content. But whatever you do, doing it with some degree of thought and awareness and self-reflection so that what you're doing is something that makes sense consistently for you. With no further ado, let's dive into it. And the first thing I want to point out is one thing I find quite confusing about this conversation, or the way people have this conversation, is that people seem to often overlook a really important distinction in the digital world, which is the distinction between streaming. So in video game terms, this is like cloud services for televisions and stuff like Netflix, and DRM-free content. Because content that's available without digital rights management is actually a strange kind of hybrid middle ground between what a lot of people consider to be digital and what a lot of people consider to be physical. I'll talk about that here really quickly just to kind of clarify what I mean. Streaming is in the terms of movies, it would be Netflix. In the term of video games, it would be something like Xbox Games Pass. In the terms of comics, it would be something like using Marvel Unlimited through a live connection. Now, I'm not a fan of streaming at all. I don't think relying on streaming is a good idea for lots of reasons. It's a personal opinion, but I'll explain what that opinion is based on. Firstly, streaming giants will dictate your choices. This is something quite subtle known as choice architecture. And what that means is the choices you have aren't completely free choices. They're choices that are dictated by the parameters of the ecosystem that you're making the choice in. I'll give you an example, a real world example of something that happened to me. I was at a friend's house and we were chatting about movies, and I was like, oh, I really fancy watching Iron Man 2 because it's abysmal. And I was trying to make the point to him that it was a terrible movie. And he was like, yeah, cool, I'll just check on whatever he had, Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, I don't even know. He was checking and he goes, Iron Man 2's not on here. Iron Man 1 is, and Iron Man 3 is. Let's watch Iron Man 3 instead. To which my response was like, dude, no, I don't want to watch a different movie. I want to watch the movie that we just said that we would watch. Do you have it on DVD somewhere? And he was like, I don't even know what a DVD is. What generation are you from? No. I just have streaming services. I went, okay, but this is limiting your choice. And his response was, well, there's thousands of movies on here. Yeah, there are thousands of movies on here, but not the one that you want. In the era before streaming, if I wanted to watch a movie, I would just go down to the high street. I'd go to a shop that sold DVDs and I would buy the DVD I wanted. And if I walk into a shop and I'm looking for Iron Man 2 on DVD and they don't have it, I don't just pick up something else because I'm there. I go to a different shop and I buy Iron Man 2 on DVD. that's what would happen. But the nature of streaming, because you're doing it from your living room, you allow them to dictate the choices that you can make. In no other circumstance would someone go, "Oh, I wanted a book on topic X, but they don't have it, so I'll just get a different book entirely because what the hell." That's not the case. And in this case, what I pointed out to him was that we want you to watch Iron Man 2, so let's go back to my place. I've got Iron Man 2 on DVD and we can watch it there. And he was a bit put out, partly because in a way he saw this as a criticism of the fact that he doesn't have any physical media, and I guess it is. But the truth is, he was allowing a streaming giant, Netflix or whoever, to dictate the choice of what he was buying, or what he was watching. Now, of course, you can argue that the high street also dictates those choices. If you go into a high street, you try 10 different shops, none of them have the DVD you want, you're kind of stuck without watching it. That's true, but there's a wider range of choice, and there's the option of going online, there's the option of going to Amazon. Ultimately, you're not as constrained in as narrow an ecosystem as if you just have Netflix and the movie that you want to watch isn't on Netflix, or if you just have Games Pass and the game you want to watch isn't on it, or if you have a comic streaming app like Comixology or Marvel Unlimited. If your comic's not on there, well, that's it, you're stuck. You shouldn't rely solely on streaming. Linked to that as well, a lot of these streaming companies, again using Netflix as an example, rely on licenses. So they might only have certain things on there for a while and then they come off streaming. This happens with video games due to licensing, and it can happen to comics as well. Finally, using live streaming, whether it's cloud servers gaming or whether or not it's using online services for movies or comics, it requires you to have good internet. I mean, if you're going traveling, or if you're staying somewhere on a beach, or if you're deciding to take a week away and go into the deepest, darkest rural wherever, then that means that you don't have the option to do what you otherwise would do if you had a video game cartridge or a physical comic. So these are the demerits of using live streaming. Now, what's much better is having stuff DRM free. Now, that can be a physical thing like a DVD, a game cartridge, or a comic. But also, it could be, for example, having your game cartridges on a memory stick. Or having your comics in PDF format so you can read them on a tablet or something like that is DRM free. It might not be physical in a normal way, but also it doesn't require online connectivity. Now, there is, of course, a middle ground about things like online verification login. So I know Nintendo Switch does this, that if you don't log on with your Switch Online account, if you don't connect to the internet at some point in a 30-day period, once it goes past the 30th day, then there's issues accessing the games that you have that you've downloaded. So that's a separate thing which I don't want to dive into. In the world of comics is really interesting because Marvel Unlimited allows you to take, at least back when I had that app, it allows you to download and take 12 comics away to read offline. But once you've read those 12, you then have to kind of go back online, delete those or sort of upload them in a way off your tablet, off your device, before you can then check out the next few as a library. So there's a strange middle ground to be considered here, but I think it's really important when we're talking about digital versus physical that we consider those. So with those bits of context out of the way, let's dive into it. What are the main arguments people have about physical games and digital games? Well, the first one, really obvious. Physical games can be resold. The value can be realized and re-realized and can even go up. You can buy a game for £20 and sell it a year later for £10 or part exchange it for £15. If it's a retro game and you hang on to it for a while, you might have bought it for £20 and then in a few years' time it might be worth 50 or 60. Digital games can't be resold. Once you've bought them, you've sunk your money in, you can't resell them. The value does not go up because it can't be traded. And whilst physical games can be lent, digital games can't be lent. You can't share it with a friend of yours unless you're willing to share passwords in your account, which is a whole other thing. So it's the same with comics. You can sell comics and comic values go up all the time. The speculation market for comics is one of the things keeping the physical market alive. But digital comics, no one gives a shit. That's not a thing. No one cares. So there's something to be said about if you're getting something physical, you're getting an asset which may be realized back into money or maybe able to realize into liquidity at a future point. Digital games don't offer you that at all. So I'd view that as a pretty serious tick in the favor of physical games. A separate issue related to physical and digital is something that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about, but Gaming on the Grid did mention it when they talked about video games. And I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind. Digital content can be cancelled or suffer historical revisionism. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's say you have a book, and the book is something like To Kill a Mockingbird or um, A Handmaid's Tale or something like that. Something which has some kind of political content, something which could be controversial. That book may, in the future, be subject to editing, revisionism, censorship. Now, if you own it on something like your Kindle, then what might happen is an update might roll out that changes that book permanently. So you can no longer read that book or read that comic the way it was originally intended. You're only looking at the redacted, censored, historically revised version. This applies to lots of things. It applies to music. I think Rihanna released an album a few years ago where she released it and everyone downloaded it, and then a few weeks later she decided to change one of the mixes or edits for one of the songs, and so the minute you logged online, it swapped that song out from your music library, and you can no longer ever access the original Rihanna song. You can only get this newer version that she produced. It's the same with television shows. Fawlty Towers is a good example if you know your British comedy. Fawlty Towers has got some questionable content in some of its episodes. I think it's all completely fine because it's very much a snapshot in time. I'm not going to get angry at a photograph the same way I'm not going to get angry at a television show from the 70s. But some people do because some people have nothing better to do. And so Fawlty Towers has been edited. And now, if you were to watch Fawlty Towers on a streaming service like Amazon Prime or something like that, you would only be watching the edited episodes. There's no way of getting hold of the real, unedited, original cut of that particular TV show unless you own it on DVD. Video games, look no further than Silent Hill PT, which not only came out as a demo, but then got removed as a demo, and then actually a release came out meaning that you couldn't even reinstall it back onto your physical device for whatever reasons to do with Konami and the issues with Metal Gear and all these sorts of things. But my point is that digital content is something you're not in control of. If I own a cartoon on DVD and I stick it in my DVD player, I can watch it from now until forever. Thing about digital content is that you're subject to the streaming companies and the companies that are hosting it. And obviously, this is for streaming companies. This isn't for DRM free digital content, largely speaking. But for ones that are being streamed, for ones that you're relying on Xbox Game Pass, how would you feel if one day you booted up something like Gears of War and the main character was different? The main character for Gears of War 1 wasn't Marcus Phoenix. What if it was a different character? What if it was someone who was black or who was gay or a woman or trans or something else? Now, I don't want to get into identity politics here, but what I'm saying is you wouldn't be in control of that change. That said, I don't want to come down completely against digital games here. The truth is, having physical games as physical assets is still somewhat limited because most games now require substantial day one patches. And physical games don't have DLC that came out subsequently. And what that means is that in a lot of cases, a physical bit of hardware, a physical game, a physical disc is nothing more than sort of an advanced version of a download code. I played the game Recore on Xbox One a little while ago, and Recore was like a well, the entire game was on the disc, but when you put it in, it was a 6.8 gig download, and only 300 meg from the disc got installed. And the reason for that is that after Recall got released a year later, they released an entirely new version, which was online only, and that's not available physically. And to access it, you have to put in the physical disc or buy it online. Long story short, what I'm saying is physical media sometimes isn't actually worth anything. It's rendered obsolete, and it's worth keeping that in mind when you're buying games and CDs and even comics. On a separate and linked note, something that's worth considering is that digital marketplaces maintain higher prices due to a lack of competition. They're anti-consumer, as far as I'm concerned. The thing about a retail marketplace is that if I want to buy the new Call of Duty game, I've got Amazon competing against HMB, competing against just a whole bunch of other different places, eBay and all sorts. So I've got a variety of different options of where I can go if I'm going to go buy physical media. I can go to a secondhand place like CEX. I can go to a car boot sale. I can go to any of these sorts of places. The thing about digital marketplaces is that if it's a PS4, PS5 game, let's say there's a PS5 game on PlayStation Network, that price is held exclusively there. There's nowhere else you can get it. There's no competition. Yes, they do have sales, and of course there are Nintendo Switch sales, there are Xbox sales, there are all these sorts of things. But the truth is that it's a monopoly. It's one single provider with one single marketplace making a decision about sale prices. There's no competitive aspect there. And that is a negative when it comes to digital content. Similarly with buying comics. I mean, comics will reach a certain price digitally, but they'll never go lower than that. Whereas I can go to my local secondhand comic shop and there'll be a bargain bin outside of comics for 10p a piece. This is something that physical trading and reselling and reselling offers that digital marketplaces don't. But let's swing back the other way. What are some other problems of buying stuff physical? Physical falls apart in the end. It doesn't matter if you're talking about comics, where spines can become unglued, things can slump, you can have pages getting exposed to damp or to mold or to mildew. Or it could be physical media when it comes to video games. Disc rot is an actual thing. Like CDs and DVDs over time become unplayable, even if they're stored very, very well, even if they're not warped or damaged by the heat. They will not last forever. Similarly, physical hardware will not last forever. Yeah, if you're talking about comics, yeah, your eyes will last as long as your eyes last. But if you're talking about PS2s or PS3s or things like that, they will not last forever. There is planned obsolescence in all of this hardware. So you might have Metal Gear Solid 4, and you might have a PS3, and you might think, right, I'm definitely going to keep this physical. I'll come back and I'll play it one day. But in 20 years' time, when you connect all that up, if you can somehow work out the right sort of television to connect it to and get hold of the right sort of wires, it might be that the disc literally just doesn't work. And if it does work, maybe you need to download a day one patch and day one DLC. And are the PS3 servers still available for you to do that? These are all issues that only apply to physical hardware. That said, digital storage is not infinite. You have to buy SD cards, you have to buy hard drives. These are expensive. They're also subject to atrophy. They can get wet, they can get damaged, or they're subject to digital corruption. You can have files that just end up getting corrupted either because you've copied them incorrectly or downloaded them incorrectly or something like that. So I live in fear of the memory card within my Nintendo Switch, which is 512 gig. I live in fear of that getting corrupted and then there'd be some issue with me re-downloading games. But these things can happen because digital isn't just digital. It doesn't exist just in thin air. It does require some kind of physical media, be that an SD card or whatever. But the truth is, there is some physical aspect to digital consumption. On a separate note, digital media can be pretty overwhelming. The thing about having so many things available digitally, be it comics on something like Marvel Unlimited, or be it video games through things like Steam and the Humble Bundle and things like that, is once you have loads and loads and loads of digital content, then it's much easier just to channel surf and to enjoy games much less. When I was a kid, 16-bit era, you got a video game, and that was the only video game you were going to get for like a month or two. So you just absolutely squeezed every moment of enjoyment out of that game. You played it through and through, over and over again. You learned every bit of it. Some of my favorite games are from that era for that reason. But there are games from a more modern era, things like, I don't know, BioShock Infinite, Call of Duty games, The Last of Us, Life is Strange, all these sorts of games, which are great, and I've played them, but I've only had a chance to play them once because I played them and I finished them, and then I'm like, oh, I need to get on to the next thing. I need to go on to the next game because there's so much out there. And it's much easier to start playing a game and then just drop it after an hour and go, yeah, this isn't grabbing me, I'm going to move on to something else. We've all seen Netflix paralysis where people are scrolling through Netflix and all the choices there, and you spend an hour scrolling through trying to work out what to watch, and in the end, you don't end up watching anything. The same thing can happen if you've got a lot of digital comics. You can be scrolling through and go, "Oh, should I read Black Widow or should I read Cap? Should I read Falcon? Should I read Avengers? Maybe I should read some DC." You've got so much that actually becomes easy to become overwhelmed and have like a decision-making paralysis. I'm not saying it's not possible with physical media, but physical media, partly because it's more expensive and it takes up more room to store, is much harder to reach a point of getting overwhelmed by the options there. And in that sense, physical media encourages people to use it, to enjoy it, to read it. When it comes to comics, I have physical comics, and once I have them, I will hopefully reread them, and often I do. And it's much easier to really enjoy and wring out every moment of comfort from a comic when it's physical. A few of the final things. One thing that I think people tend to overlook is when you're buying stuff digitally, you're making lots of online accounts. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're talking Marvel Unlimited and Comixology, DC Universe, or if you're talking about Games Pass and PlayStation streaming and Nintendo Switch Online, Steam, the Ubisoft Uplay, EA Store, Blizzard Activision accounts. All these things are more online accounts. And I'm aware they're all free, but at the same time, they're free because we as consumers are being monetized. They are harvesting our data to make these things free. And I'm personally not keen on having my data harvested to that kind of extent. I prefer to keep some kind of control over my own digital privacy. And so as a result, that I think is a mark against the idea of going digital for many of these things, at least in terms of streaming apps or things that require accounts. I'm not saying it's good or bad. For me, it deters me. And for you, it might be something you want to consider. Something else worth considering, because it's not necessarily clear cut, is the argument that people have that digital storage is less wasteful and more carbon friendly. That's arguably true. Yeah, absolutely. If I'm buying comics, they have to cut down trees, they have to print comics, they have to use chemicals, they have to store it in a truck. The truck has to drive places. People have to then take it to other places. I then have to pick it up. It's physical, it's wasteful, there's a carbon impact to that. I completely agree. But the cloud doesn't exist in thin air. The cloud is based on server farms, a distributed network of servers and technologies across the entire world. And those server farms not only have a large carbon footprint in terms of being built with precious metals and an entire infrastructure around them, but they also generate a lot of heat in perpetuity. Where I live in the UK, there's a server farm just off the coast of Scotland, buried under the ocean, and it uses ocean water to cool it. But as a result, it's contributing to global warming. In LA and San Francisco, something like 40% of the water of the entirety of that state is used to cool Google server farms. Going digital is not necessarily something Greta Thunberg would approve of. So, I mean, just think it through. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but to say that it hasn't got a carbon footprint, that's just not true. I've been going on for a little while, so what I'm going to do is try to wrap it up. The question, I guess, is are we going to see this resurgence of interest in physical games continue? And frankly, I'm unsure. The current resurgence that we're seeing about physical games and physical comics, the omnibus collecting community and comics and all these sorts of things, is really interesting, and I admit I'm part of it. But its reasons are quite unique. Now, vinyl as a medium resurged over the last 10, 15 years due to quality. There is an empirical objective quality and superiority to vinyl music than there is to electronic music, because electronic music is compressed. When you have an MP3, which by the way you can easily get a DRM free MP3, and you can just listen to that and then you own it, and it's digital content with a tiny physical footprint on your MP3 player or your smartphone or whatever. But vinyl is much better than that. The quality is tangibly different, and that's one of the reasons vinyl saw a resurgence. Does the same apply to games or comics? Is a physical disc of Bioshock Infinite better than the downloaded version on my Nintendo Switch? Well, it's kind of hard to say. Is a physical comic better than having it virtually on a comic reader app on my tablet? Hard to say. A lot of the reason these things have resurged is due to something we mentioned at the beginning, which is the cost of these things and the ability to have these as concrete assets that can then become liquid assets. In other words, the retro and collecting community. Now, I'm part of the retro and collecting community to an extent. I don't fall foul of FOMO and the fear of missing out that seems to affect a lot of people in the comic community and the video game community. And that's largely because I'm not online, I'm not on social media. I'm not on Instagram, I'm not on Facebook. I don't find myself subject to the same kind of peer pressure factors that a lot of people do that can lead to a sense of FOMO. However, I do also see this aspect of commodity fetishism, to use a term from the Communist Manifesto, I think. But commodity fetishism is this idea that you own stuff, and by owning stuff, you have more stuff, and the more stuff you have, the more value you have, and so on. It's really interesting. It's a really kind of capitalism gone riot sort of thing. And a lot of people have that. A lot of people want the physical comic just because they want the physical comic, or they want the physical games and console because they want the physical games and consoles. And I'm kind of like that. I mean, I've got PS1 games, and I don't even have a PS1. I have Halo on my original Xbox and the remastered version on my 360, and then I have the Master Chief Collection. But that's just because each of those has a different kind of emotional connection to me. Each of those is a different thing which I remember and I enjoy, and I'm like, yeah, do you know what? I've got nostalgia for that. I want that specifically. But it can go overboard. That said, it can go overboard the other way. I mean, having stuff digitally is way slicker, is way more streamlined, is way more minimalist. But there is kind of a minimalist fetishism that goes on quite a lot, where people are obsessed with having no physical media of any kind, as if that puts them in some kind of moral high ground. It doesn't. Going digital doesn't mean that you've got better options. It doesn't mean that you have more freedom. It doesn't mean that you have a better imprint on the environment. None of those things. We just talked about all those things. If you're 100% digital, then you have a substantial carbon footprint. You're beholden to the internet in your area, which, let's be honest, isn't something that everyone has great internet. Um, and you're beholden to choice architecture and a variety of the other things that we've just talked about. But nonetheless, some people obsess about minimalism. I'm not blaming Marie Kondo. You know, there is something to be said about this idea of you should only keep stuff if it sparks joy in you. But there is a way that people go way too far in that direction. And they're way too obsessed with having stuff as slick, as streamlined, and minimalist as possible, even when it gets to a point that actually, in my opinion, it goes too far. I have a lot of stuff digitally. But I don't want to go completely digital for all the arguments we've just discussed. And I think it's really important for yourself as a viewer, as a listener, as someone listening to my channel, to have a bit of a think to yourself of how far do you want to go down the digital space because of all the things that we've just said. How far do you want to go down the physical space? Do you want to have a massive library of insane content? I saw a YouTube video a little while ago of RGT85 selling his video game collection for $40,000. And all the stuff he had in there, yeah, very familiar to me. I've similarly gone through phases of massively culling my comics and culling my video games. I'm in a phase now where I'm culling my video games. And I can do a video on that if anyone's interested. But the truth is that with all these sorts of things, there's a middle ground. Commodity fetishism and wanting everything physically, not great. Minimalist fetishism and an obsession with having things slick and streamlined and without physical media can also become a bit obsessive. In that Gaming Off the Grid video I saw, the line they kept on using was one actually from um, a World Economic Forum essay from 2016, which was, "You'll own nothing and you'll be happy," which I found really interesting. In a lot of ways, it's kind of evocative of something that I just want to end with, which is um, a quote from the movie Fight Club with Brad Pitt, where the character Tyler Durden says the following: "In the world I see, you're stalking elk through the damp canyon forests around the ruins of the Rockefeller Center. You'll wear leather clothes that will last you the rest of your life. You'll climb the wrist-thick kudzu vines that wrap the Sears Tower. And when you look down, you'll see tiny figures pounding corn, laying strips of venison on the empty carpool lane of some abandoned superhighway." It's a good quote and it's a good scene. And to some extent, Durden here is paraphrasing Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and the Unabomber Manifesto. Google that if you're interested to know what that is. But I think that there is a lot to be said about being cautious about how much physical media we own and how much we care about it. If you're not careful, the things that you own start to own you, and that's very, very true. But at the same time, an obsession with this kind of ultra minimalist, ultra austere, monastic grassroots, I have nothing physical and I'm just a nomad, that's not necessarily the healthiest way to live. And whichever route you choose, I hope that you choose it by thinking it through carefully. I hope that you consider a lot of the points that I've put forward. I hope that you kind of work out where you stand and what your personal subjective tolerances and objective preferences are for all these things. And yeah, let me know in the comments down below. I'd be really interested in what people think. I've done library tours of my physical library, which of course is pretty large. It's an entire dedicated room. I've got loads of video games. I've got loads of comics. Yeah, I'd be really interested to hear what everyone here has got to say. So yeah, thanks for watching, And until next time, remember, check out Gaming Off the Grid, really interesting channel, really great video content there. And I'll catch everyone in the next video.